Good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming out on a glorious Saturday afternoon and coming to this place for our Richard Brogan lectures. In just a few minutes, Buddy will tell us more about that remarkable man and the lecture series, but I just wanted to say welcome to those of you that are here in person and also to those of you who are watching this online and those of you who will watch it later. The marvels of technology that we have learned over the last 19 months enables us to not only record these sessions, but to keep them and for those to be viewed later. But for all of you, welcome. We are glad you are here, and we're thankful for friendship and for whatever brings us here together as church family. Rob and Janie Sellers are very, very dear friends of mine and my husband's, and we're delighted for them to come. Just a brief word, because that will take place later, but these wonderful photographs, perhaps after you can come up and look at them. There are also 31 more that are hanging in our fellowship hall, so you'll have the opportunity to see some of the amazing vistas that this remarkable couple has enjoyed over the last years, their years of ministry around the world, their friendships with people of other faiths. And I think you will see in Janie's photographs not just an artistic eye, but also a loving eye, as she is captured so much what they appreciate of other people, other places, and other faiths. So I'll welcome Buddy to come and talk to you about the lecture series.
The Richard Brogan Lecture Series is dedicated to the memory of Richard Brogan, a longtime pioneer in race relations and an advocate for human rights through his ministries with the Mississippi Baptist Convention, his friendships and cooperative ministries with the National Baptist Convention, and his pastorates in Mississippi. Dick was the president of the Mississippi Baptist Seminary in Jackson from 1978 to 1988 and worked with pastors and chaplains and the Mississippi River Ministry. He led the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship Initiative of Delta Dawn in Mississippi and served as the interim coordinator of CBF of Mississippi. Toward the end of his life, he became a hospital chaplain and served as chaplain for hospice ministries. He was a longtime resident of Clinton. He was married to Catherine Kitty Brogan, who is a current member of Northside and, of course, here today. They have 3 children and 1 grandchild. In this small way, we honor this saint of Northside Baptist Church, giving thanks to God for his life and his witness.
The first lecture that was dedicated to Dick was in September of 2014, and Dr. Bill Leonard came and spoke at that time. And through the years, we've had excellent speakers, and we're thankful for each one. Today, especially, I'm thankful for Rob Sellers and for his preparation. Rob is an MC alumni. He's a Choctaw, and many of you remember, perhaps, he spoke at Bradley Pope's funeral and told wonderful, wonderful stories about that, a deep and abiding friendship for Bradley and for Joanne and for indeed all of their family. As I said, he grew up in Florida in a Baptist pastor's family. He was a summer missionary after college in the Philippines. He spent 25 years with the Foreign Mission Board, he and Janie, as missionaries in Indonesia, the largest Muslim nation in the world. And he went there first as a missionary journeyman for 2 years and then later as a career missionary teacher. There on that multi-faith, intercultural island of Java, he fell in love, he says, with the beauty and diversity of religious and cultural traditions, and especially the people. During his furlough, he earned a PhD in theological studies, and that's where John and I met, Janie and Rob. He was working on a PhD, but they were also going to the movies together. John and Rob. So there were times for fun, exactly. While Janie and I were studiously working, they were watching movies. But I digress, I'm sorry. But he, after getting his PhD, they returned to Indonesia. He taught there in the seminary, and then, as God would have it, they didn't get their visa renewed. It didn't come through, and so they came back to the States. He taught at Baylor for a while, and he was very involved in the interfaith movement. Then at Hardin-Simmons Logston Seminary, where they spent, how many years were you all there? 18 years at Logston Seminary, influencing wonderful theological students and making such a great mark. Probably what impressed me the most is these wonderful deep friendships that Rob and Janie have had over the years with people of other faiths. And Rob has been very involved with the interfaith movement, but also served as a trustee and an officer of the Parliament of the World's Religions. And he was the chairman of the board for a year and served in that capacity. And you have to know, you hear stories, and the people that they name that they are friends with will just amaze you, but in a very humble way that was all about friendship and learning from people of other faiths. Rob and Janie have been married for 49 years. They have 2 wonderful children who live in Texas, College Station and Waco, and Rob and Janie are living in Waco now, kind of enjoying at least 2 grandchildren, and then they have 3 others at College Station. So, Rob, come share your heart with us, and we look forward to what you have to share.
Thank you so much, Buddy and Susan, for the introduction to this wonderful lecture series and a personal introduction. It's a great privilege for Janie and me to be here with you this weekend. We're honored to be here at a time when you are remembering and honoring Richard Brogan, and I want to say to Catherine how pleased we are to join the many people who honor your husband with these programs. I'm grateful to Courtney Stamey, to Susan, to Buddy, and to members of the Arrangements Committee who made it possible for us to be here to be a part of this lectureship. The theme chosen for this year's lectureship is Christianity and the Way Forward. And in this first lecture, I'd like to talk about Christians living faithfully among neighbors who follow other spiritual paths. As Susan has already mentioned, I was born into a very busy and dedicated Christian family. My dad and mom were involved in ministry in Southern Baptist churches. I chose to come to Mississippi College and then to Southern Seminary for my MDiv and later my PhD. While in school, I served as minister to youth at Woodland Hills Baptist Church in Jackson, and then Broadway Baptist Church in Louisville and St. John's Baptist Church in Charlotte. So 3 good Baptist churches. After college, as she mentioned, I was a BSU summer missionary in the Philippines and then a journeyman in Indonesia. And then Janie and I were career missionaries to Indonesia for 25 years. And so you might say that my Baptist identity is quite strong, but along the way, I also became fascinated by and committed to the interfaith movement. And so while I began in ministry as a Baptist exclusivist, I am now a Christian pluralist. How did this transition happen? In 1973, as a 28-year-old, I co-authored a missions musical called The Name Givers. It had little impact beyond the church young adult choirs for whom it was written, but many of the lyrics remain with me today, especially the lyrics to one of the songs entitled On a Journey. Journey, oh journey, I'm on a journey to become, seizing what cannot be planned, a chance for letting self expand, stretching tall to reach the key that will unlock authentic me, squinting in the gathering haze for visions equal to these days, striding at an eager pace, convinced I soon will know my place. Journey, oh journey, I'm on a journey to become. The spiritual journey or pilgrimage is both an ancient and a contemporary metaphor. It points to the possibility of personal growth and transformation. And as this song from 45 years ago suggests, it is spontaneous choice, personal authenticity, courageous vision, and meaningful place that enable one's journey to be positive and perhaps life-changing. The metaphor of a journey is very important to me. It provides a framework for understanding the trajectory of my life and why I like to contemplate living faithfully among neighbors who practice other spiritual traditions. The Oxford Dictionary of Religions describes journey as the literal or metaphorical movement to a condition or a place of holiness or healing. Psychotherapist Easton Hamilton, in his article, The Journey of Becoming, A Map for Change, explains we are the result of a journey from behavior to nature, a journey that begins with seemingly innocent and what may appear inconsequential actions, and yet which end up creating patterns that become incredible forces of nature. Our behaviors are like sowing seeds in the fields of infinite possibility, and our nature is the fruit of those seeds come to life. Now, when we are traversing the mountains and the valleys, the switchbacks and straight stretches, the rough places and the smooth trails, we don't always understand how our journey might lead us toward becoming. Psychologist Sam Keene explains doubt and dialogue may always be with us, but Keene suggests we do need to face into the wind and keep the great questions of life alive. There's a crucial link, I believe, between our identity, our memory, and the places where we have been. That's what British academic Philip Sheldrake says. He insists the concept of place refers not simply to geographic location, but to a dialectic relationship between our environment and the human narrative. He says place is the space that has the capacity to be remembered, to evoke in us what is most precious. And because of this, the human sense of place is a critical theological, spiritual issue. Now, my life has led me to a lot of places around the world. Some of them are actual, many of them are imaginary. Not every place that I recall is really significant or worth remembering, but there have been many places that are the stuff of pilgrimage. And I consider my residence and travels in Asia especially to be a map of my soul, where places forever held in my memory have helped to form my identity. On New Year's Day of 1977, Janie and I arrived in Indonesia, the vast archipelago of more than 17,500 islands, the world's most populous nation. Living in central Java was both a geographical backdrop as well as an essential actor in my personal drama. We were surrounded by beauty, not only volcanic mountains and shimmering rice fields, sandy beaches, and lush rainforests, but also by gracious, gentle people. And as I began to understand more about the fascinating customs and spiritual rituals of Indonesian people, I became aware that the common experiences of humankind and also the rich particularity of place was having an impact on my life. And so over the years, Indonesia's motto, Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, which means unity in diversity, became my philosophical maxim. When I arrived in Java as a young idealistic American missionary, I knew far too little of the folk religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Confucianism, and Islam that most Indonesians practice. While my education had been rigorous and my experience very practical, Nothing I had learned had prepared me for such a multi-layered, religiously pluralistic setting as Java. It was there, living and working as part of a Christian minority community, that I would learn the value and the splendor of different peoples, cultures, and religions. In this largest Islamic nation in the world, every neighborhood seemed to have its own mosque, where the faithful went on Fridays to pray and give alms and repeat their confession of prayer. On Eid al-Adha, the day of sacrifice that commemorates the Quranic story of Abraham's willingness to sacrifice his son Ishmael, I once joined some 200,000 Muslims at South Jakarta's major mosque to observe the slaughter of hundreds of donated goats and oxen so the meat could be distributed to the patiently waiting poor. Near the Baptist seminary where Janie and I were professors, well within the sound of the Muslim call to prayer, is Gedung Batu. This ancient shrine was built to honor the Ming Dynasty sea captain Cheng Ho, who sailed a ship into the local harbor in 1406 and was identified by the local Chinese as the deity Sampo Kung. Supplicants come regularly to this 700-year-old grotto to burn incense, to pray before one of the brightly painted plaster images, or to remember their departed ancestors as they sit quietly, as Janie and I sometimes did, beneath the huge orange-blossomed trees in the courtyard. Overlooking that temple complex and dotting the lush terraced hillsides outside our city are dozens of tiny villages of rice farmers. With the same tools and techniques their ancestors have used for centuries, they plant and harvest their crops, anticipating the help of Dewi Shri, the rice goddess. It was instructive for our family to ride outside the city and see people and beasts working in the fertile fields at all stages of rice production. Once I took a trek, guided by a Javanese friend, to the rocky southern coastline of Java, where thousands of animist villagers come annually to place their orchid offerings on the outgoing tide, hoping to placate the powerful underwater deity Loro Kidul, and thus to ensure the safety of fishers who daily go out in small pontoon boats to ply the unpredictable waters of the Indian Ocean. Not far from the bamboo huts of these folk religionists are located two architectural wonders of Javanese life. Borobudur, the largest Buddhist temple in the world with its 500 Buddha statues, and its magnificent counterpart, Prambanan, dedicated to the Trimurti of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, Hinduism's central deities. Each of these two temples is a United Nations World Heritage Site and a legacy of the Hindu-Buddhist kingdoms that flourished in central Java more than 1,300 years ago. Late one tropical evening on Hari Waisak, the day commemorating the Buddha's birth, Janie and I sat cross-legged on the grass with thousands of the Buddhist faithful to watch saffron-robed monks lead a candlelight processional along the ascending pathway of the carved spiritual mountain of Borobudur. On another occasion, under a full moon, we listened to the gongs and clangs of gamelan orchestra instruments while dozens of dancers enacted Ramayana stories of heroes and demons on the stone terraces of Prambanan. Living so close to this intriguing variety of religious activity, among peoples who perform their rituals with amazingly common fervor, gave me an appreciation for the rich diversity in the religious world. Relating to neighbors and friends and colleagues of so many distinct backgrounds taught me to accept others whose beliefs and rituals differ from my own. It also prodded me to pursue a path of discovery as I began to study these peoples and their religions and to consider what kind of Christian I should be in a pluralistic world. Gradually, two impressions about these followers of other faiths became very clear. One was how truly alike we all were. We felt the same sorts of joys and sorrows, harbored similar dreams and ambitions, and experienced comparable victories and defeats. My other thought was how very different we all were. Their sacred stories and rituals were not like mine, yet I saw that many of these people gained enormous strength for daily living from their own religions, and also became aware that the devotion, self-discipline, and genuine goodness of my friends of other faiths challenged and sometimes shamed my spiritual maturity and moral character. And thus, over time, I began reframing my approach toward people of other faiths. I found that by being humble and teachable when relating to them, willing to listen instead of so quick to speak, I could more easily build friendships, gain important cultural and religious insights, and earn the right to speak of my own beliefs and spiritual practices. When we act that way among religious others, perhaps we will realize that we are only one part of the human family, that our story is but a brief scene in the cosmic drama that has been unfolding since the beginning of time. One place on the map of my soul is Pangandaran Beach, where Janie and I took our young son and daughter for a few days over the New Year's weekend in 1982. The beautiful palm tree-shaded white sandy beach was relatively empty when we spread our blankets, got out the children's plastic toys, and applied suntan lotion. But within a few minutes, word must have spread that we were there, londos, whites, on the beach with our two blonde children. Soon dozens of curious Javanese adults and youth stood quietly in a large circle surrounding us and our oblivious toddlers. With betel nut-stained smiles and sparkling eyes, these friendly people seemed to be telling us not that we were unwelcome foreigners on their beach, but that we were guests whom they valued. It was easy to perceive, even in that ever-enlarging crowd, the tenderness and love with which Indonesians typically treat children. These were almost certainly not Christians, for most people in West Java are Sundanese, an ethnic group statistically 98% Muslim. So they were not like us, except that they were just like us, part of the human family, all of us touched by the innocence and wonder of childhood. Another pushpin on the map of my soul was our Indonesian community in South Jakarta a few years later. Our children were sound asleep, and Janie and I were settling down for the evening when I noticed an eerie quietness outside our window. Walking out into the street, I saw a mass evacuation occurring at the end of our neighborhood. Thousands of people were hurrying down the main road, away from some obvious danger, some carrying small children or meager possessions. Turning on our television, we heard the news that a fire had started at a military armory a few kilometers from our house. Rocket shells stacked like firewood had ignited and were shooting off into the night sky. We lived so close that the shells were still climbing as they went over our neighborhood. Though the rockets were not armed with explosives, they were crashing through clay tile roofs all over the city, injuring and killing many unaware and vulnerable people. Thinking back to that scene of peril and pain and panic, I realized that probably most of those fleeing persons were not Christians. They were Muslims or folk religionists, followers of Chinese traditions or adherents of a blend of several religions. They were neighbors we'd never met, people frightened about the safety of themselves, their children, their elderly relatives. Our family was not personally at risk, but the tragedy was real. It was scary, and those were our brothers and sisters in pain. Perhaps I'd grown too accustomed some years later to seeing people dig through the garbage containers at the edge of our street near our home in the central Java city of Semarang. Then one day I prepared a sermon for the small English language congregation I was serving as interim pastor. Thinking that the story of a poor beggar lying at the gate of an apathetic, self-involved rich man might strikingly fit the congregation of international middle-class worshipers, I chose as my topic Jesus' parable of the rich man and Lazarus in Luke 16. But how surprised I was when, returning home after the service, I noticed a man covered only in a filthy loincloth digging through the garbage not 100 meters from my house. Aware of the irony as I drove past him that afternoon, I circled the block and stopped at a neighborhood waterroom, a food stall with canvas walls surrounding several crude wooden tables and benches and a tiny cooking area. There I bought a serving of rice wrapped in a banana leaf, along with a plastic bag of warm tea secured with a rubber band. And I took them back to the man at my gate. Rolling down the car window, I extended the little meal toward him. He came close, taking my offering without expressing any appreciation. But I thought, well, that's okay. I've not ignored him. I've done my moral duty. For several days after, however, this beggar remained near our gate. So every afternoon I went by the waterroom to buy him a meal, each one a little bit more complete than the last. And I would park my car and get out and try to engage him in conversation, but he was apparently one of the walking wounded, so he didn't talk to me. So impaired from a life of poor nutrition and chronic illness and exposure to the weather, all he could do was stare and accept the food. Then one day I had a brainstorm, or maybe it was an epiphany. Taking this man by the elbow, I led him slowly around the corner to the waterroom. I parted the tent flaps and we went inside and sat at a table among other customers, university students and civil servants on their way home from school or work, who looked up, startled at what I, a foreigner, strange foreigner, had done. I purchased 2 large hot meals and watched as the person at my gate sat across from me with a sort of uncommon dignity. Naked except for his ragged loincloth, he ate silently, with his dirty hands, his glazed eyes looking out past long matted hair, his eyes not focusing on anything or anyone in particular. This man, whom everyone in that waterroom would have called an orang gila, a crazy person, was almost certainly not a Christian. He was likely born into a Muslim family in some central Java village. He was probably taken to prayers at a local mosque by his father and mother, who never imagined their son would one day dig through garbage bins or sleep on the street. The social stigma of his homelessness, weakened physical condition, and desperate poverty had long ago made it impossible for him to practice the religion of his childhood. And yet this Muslim beggar taught me a lesson about human dignity, about compassion, as we sat together at the table that day. In that holy moment, surrounded by the Eucharistic elements of rice and tea, I felt very close to God. Mysteriously, after taking that stranger on our street with me for a meal that day, I never saw him in our neighborhood again. It was as if he simply disappeared. For me then, though it is illogical, he was, as Mother Teresa has often expressed it, Christ in the surprising guise of the poor. My spiritual journey has led me to transition from being a Christian exclusivist, a missionary, to a Christian pluralist interfaith advocate. Why do I believe that nurturing interreligious relationships is important for Christians? I offer 2 reasons. First, Christians are enriched by their encounters with followers of other faiths. If the only people we associate with are like us racially, educationally, socioeconomically, politically, geographically, culturally, and religiously, then we're much less likely to change or grow. In my life, the wisdom of the ancient Hebrew proverb has been proven again and again. Iron sharpens iron, and one person sharpens the wits of another. To use a different biblical metaphor, there have been times when my soul was parched and I drew satisfying, invigorating water from alien wells. Someone might ask, why would a Christian seek spiritual refreshment from foreign sources? In John 4, Jesus was journeying through Samaria, where he stopped to rest at the well Jacob had built in Canaanite territory. His disciples were astonished that he would drink from an alien well and talk there with a woman, especially a Gentile. Yet Jesus didn't hesitate to quench his thirst from that Canaanite well and visit with one who regularly drank its water. Of course, if we need water to drink, it doesn't matter where in the world we might be. When we find water that won't make us sick, we will eagerly drink. But speaking figuratively, the issues become more complex. For whether or not we drink from an alien well does not simply depend upon how thirsty we are, the well's accessibility, or the purity of its water. But with the Samaritan woman, Jesus takes the physical well and shifts the conversation to spiritual thirst and living water. The question then becomes, can life-giving resources be drawn from wells that aren't Christian? Many Christian scholars and practitioners note the benefits of drinking from interfaith wells. Benedictine abbess and prolific writer Joan Chittister, for example, suggests that our common humanity justifies our drawing from other wells. She writes, whatever the distinctions of culture, whatever the time and place in which we've lived, we're all human beings. We have at our fingertips a reservoir of wisdom as broad as the sky, as deep as history. For each great spiritual tradition in its own way suggests a model of what it means to be a holy person. Prominent Methodist eco-theologian J. McDaniel maintains that we should drink from other wells because our own water may be less than pure. He says many people in different religions are realizing that the water is polluted, and that in order to cease polluting it, they need not only to dig within their own heritages, but also to learn from other religions. Matthew Fox, Dominican priest and author silenced by the Vatican for his creation spirituality, argues that the source of water in all the wells is the very same divine river. James 1:17 calls this common river the father of lights, but Fox uses a different image. He insists there is one underground river, but there are many wells into that river: an African well, a Taoist well, a Buddhist well, a Jewish well, a Muslim well, a goddess well, a Christian well, and Aboriginal wells. To go down a well is to practice a tradition, but we would make a grave mistake, an idolatrous one, if we confuse the well itself with the flowing waters of the underground river. Many wells, but one river. And finally, retired Presbyterian professor W. Eugene March believes that the multiplicity of wells may actually be God's good idea. He says there are some 50 million species of plants and animal life currently to be found, and it's estimated that perhaps as many as 50 billion have existed at one time or another across the long lifespan of our world. So why should we be surprised or troubled by the reality of different ways to express spirituality? Since diversity seems to be the norm in creation, by analogy, a pluralism of religious responses among the people of the world is reasonable to expect. Now, no place has been more fulfilling or thirst-quenching for me than the Parliament of the World's Religions, which Susan mentioned. The Parliament has enabled me to become friends with trusty co-workers whose different spiritual wells have made me a better Christian. I celebrate my colleague Andres Corbin-Arthin, a Spanish-born immigrant American who directs the Earth Spirit community and serves as president of the European Congress of Ethnic Religions. Traveling a couple of years ago throughout Europe with Andres, I realized that he believes the sacred is manifested through the natural world, and his belief has deepened my gratitude for the earth and strengthened my resolve to work for the earth's protection. I'm thankful also for Kasumita Peterson, Professor Emerita of Religious Studies at St. Francis College in New York City. Attending meetings with Kasumita in New York has allowed me to observe this brilliant Hindu follower of Sanatana Dharma and her advocacy for human rights in her work at the United Nations. Kasumita's dedicated service inspires me also to seek justice for everyone. And I have been influenced by Kirit Daftari, an Indian-American manufacturer and Jain devotee. Having roomed with Kirit at several Parliament gatherings, I know that he begins each day sitting on the floor with 2 hours of silent meditation. Kirit also journeys joyfully to India as often as he possibly can to serve the needs of his religious master. Kirit's desire for connecting with the divine each morning for 2 hours on the floor and for being with his beloved guru in India challenges me whenever I think I'm too busy to pray or to be on retreat with my master. Alien wells and those who draw from them. These are important resources for my own growth. Sure, I have vibrant, living water to share with friends from my Christian well, and I must certainly do that when it's appropriate or when it's invited. But why shouldn't I also be willing to drink from other wells? When I'm especially dry and thirsting for righteousness, these cups of cold alien water might refresh my soul. Nurturing interfaith relations is important because we are enriched by our encounters with the religious other. Perhaps the iron of their character, behavior, and religious devotion will sharpen our own lives. And then a second reason. Interfaith relations matter because working together with followers of other paths helps Christians to advance global peace, justice, and sustainability. The shocking images of terrorist attacks around the world demonstrate that religious fervor, fueled by political diatribe and little regard for the sanctity of life, can result in hate speech, violence, and war. We know that it's not just any one religious group whose failure to practice love threatens our future, because there are extremist factions in all religions. Nonetheless, it's also true that all around the globe, women and men from all religions perform heroic acts when they advocate for peace, seek justice for all people, and work to protect the earth. Masahisa Goi, a Japanese visionary who studied spiritual teachings as varied as the Chinese philosophy of Lao Tzu and the Semitic ethics of the Bible, founded Byakko Shinko Kai, a New Thought community that was dedicated to peacemaking. During one intense period of meditation, Goi felt that he was charged with a 5-word prayer, "May peace prevail on earth." And so Goi determined to introduce that prayer globally by planting peace poles. And over the following years, about 200,000 peace poles were erected by Goi and his followers all over the world, with that simple prayer inscribed at the base of each pole in hundreds of languages. Many religious leaders have planted peace poles, including Pope John Paul II, Mother Teresa, and the Dalai Lama. This one man's simple prayer has become an inspiration to millions of people who've never heard his name, but who share his passion and hope. May peace prevail on earth. It's crucial to establish friendships with others because when we work together, then the possibility of peace is multiplied. For peace everywhere begins with our acting peaceably wherever we live. But interfaith relations can also advance the cause of justice. It was Reinhold Niebuhr, the respected 20th century theologian from Union Theological Seminary, who connected love and justice. In his view, the relation between love and justice is dialectical. Justice is love in realizable action, while love is the motive behind the most just social order. Shirin Ebadi, an Iranian Muslim, was born into a family of legal professionals. Ebadi herself studied law at the University of Tehran, and in 1975 she became the first woman judge to preside over a court in Iran. The Iranian Revolution of 1979, however, changed her fate forever. Ruling imams declared that women couldn't serve as judges, so Ebadi became a clerical worker in the very court over which she had once presided. Later, when she was prevented from practicing law at all, even as a clerk, she retired and she established with 4 other lawyers the Defenders of Human Rights Center. Despite constant death threats and at least one unsuccessful attempt on her life, Shirin Ebadi continues to work for justice and freedom for all, including for Afghan refugees and for followers of minority religions in Iran. It's a commitment that makes her a target of extremists, and for which she was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2003. This next weekend, the weekend of 16th, 17th, and 18th of October, the Parliament of the World's Religions will have its 7th convening online, a virtual parliament, and one of the luminaries, among so many others, will be Shirin Ebadi from Iran. Indeed, when we express our love and cooperate and work with people of other faiths to bring about justice, our work is multiplied. And now finally, interfaith cooperation gives us a louder voice as we promote actions that guard environmental sustainability. You remember Standing Rock, North Dakota, don't you? Hundreds of followers of many faiths working cooperatively joined together to protect the fragility of the earth and to stand in solidarity with the Standing Rock Sioux Nation to protest the Dakota Access Pipeline. Dave Archambault II, the elected leader of the tribe, explains, "We are a sovereign nation and we will fight to protect our water and our sacred places from the brazen private interests trying to push this pipeline through to benefit a few wealthy people. And we are so grateful that many Americans have come together to support the tribe and are asking for a fair, balanced, and lawful pipeline process." We need to cooperate with people of other faiths because when we work together, we can do a better job of protecting the earth. Nurturing interfaith friendships, then, is important because working together with religious others as Christians will help us to advance global peace, justice, and sustainability. The journey to become what I've described, it's my own unique journey. Along the way, I have chosen to befriend followers of other faiths, and my life has been enriched. It's immensely more meaningful because of that decision. But you have your own journey, and you are making it. You must make your own choices. You have places that have connected with your narrative, where hard lessons and important transitions, life-changing words and divine revelations have shaped you, when your soul has been transformed again and again. We are all human becomings. It's exciting to realize that no matter our age, we're still sowing seeds in the fields of infinite possibility. Seeds that one day hopefully will blossom into the full nature of our authentic selves as we lean into the wind, learn more of the mystery, and ultimately cross the finish line on our own journey to become. Our journey is our own, but we do not journey alone. And for the rest of our days, may we determine to live faithfully in Christian community, as you have here at Northside, with our neighbors also, though, who follow other spiritual paths. And together, may we make a better world. We have time for some questions, and then maybe even break a little early for dinner. Is that appropriate if we allow some questions? I would love to address anything you've heard that piqued your interest. Something you agree with, something you disagree with, something you want to ask more about. I would ask if you just, maybe if you wouldn't mind, stand so people can hear your question and ask it, and I'll do my best to address it. Who has a question? I know I wasn't that clear. Come on. Yes, ma'am.
Well,
Introduce yourself.
my name's Margaret Brogan. My husband and I were missionaries from 1986 until 2001. The thing that we found, we went to El Salvador after the Civil War in the 80s. The mission board didn't like that we were actually having, relationships with people that were not exactly what they wanted us to do. As a matter of fact, we were told that we weren't going to be asked to come back to that mission field because we were not sticking with the. Now, first, they wanted us to be in the capital city. We said no. We wanted to be in the city where we were serving, where my husband was teaching in seminary. It didn't make sense. But anyway, I just wondered if you had any pushback from one mission board for feeling the way that you did. And of course, we left in 2001 because of the whole document thing that's going on.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that question and that testimony. We were aware that the situation, the atmosphere, the methodology, and so forth of what was the Foreign Mission Board when we were appointed, maybe when you were as well, as it became the International Mission Board, and changes were taking place within the Southern Baptist Convention. There were regulations that we never really complied with. For example, we were supposed to keep a monthly record, a week-by-week record of your witnessing episodes, and were you successful or were you not successful, and turn in those kinds of reports. These sorts of things, that the switch from a more holistic kind of ministry to one that was largely centered upon evangelism and church planting, left out a lot of missionaries who were doing other things, be it medical, theological, social, whatever it might be. If you were not a field evangelist or a general evangelist, a church planter, you, at least in our mission, were sort of a second tier, second category of missionary.
Well, then later on they came up with teams, and if you weren't working within what the team wanted to do, then you had to stop doing it. We had a person who was doing Spain, who was doing a prison ministry and highly successful, and was told, no, you can't do that.
Yeah.
Because that's not part of your team.
Yeah.
Go.
If you'll allow, I'm sort of inspired to share one more anecdote with you. One of our last mission meetings that we attended, the area director for Southeast Asia was the primary preacher for the last service. And he concluded his message by asking the question, when you ride down the streets of your city and you see thousands of people along the street who are lost, does your heart break because they do not know Jesus? And something just rose up in my mind and my heart. And when the service was over, I went straight to him and I said, when I ride down the streets of my city and I see the thousands of people, which was very common in Indonesia, thousands of people along the street, I said, my heart doesn't break. I rejoice because I love and admire these people. I love their language. I love their culture. I love their religion, which helps so many of them become better people, and which has helped me to become a better Christian as I have learned about their religions. And he said, oh, wait, no. Let's get down on our knees right this moment and ask God to break your heart. And I said, took my arm out of his grasp and said, no, I'm all right, thank you, and went away. So there was this shift. You said maybe they didn't appreciate the direction you were going and you needed to go in another direction. We were experiencing that as well. We lost our visas. We did not have our visas long enough to refuse to sign a document and be fired. But at any rate, we experienced the same thing you did and that many, many others did. A shift that was not in keeping with our theological convictions.
I mean, we were taught when we were in the missionary work to develop and be part of the culture, to make your life there, to make your roots there. But if you try to do that, the other missionaries would look at you like you're getting your emotional support from the national line. Why don't you come to us with the emotional support? It was just completely backwards what we thought was theology.
Thank you for sharing that. Who else has a comment or question? Don't be shy. Now's the time, Buddy or John, when you speak up and say, "I've got one." Yes. Tell us. Oh, yes, that's Matthew Fox. Yeah. Yes. Yes, it's Matthew Fox. Matthew Fox is a Roman Catholic, and I can give you, it is from a book called One River, Many Wells, Wisdom Springing from Global Faiths. That's 2004. Matthew Fox is also speaking at the Parliament. In fact, if you go on the website for the Parliament of the World's Religions and look at the amazing program, there are about 500 breakout sessions to select from. I mean, people like Noam Chomsky and just bunches of academics and religious leaders. But in the main sessions, I mentioned Sri Abada, but the Dalai Lama and all manner of remarkable people. So it's something that you can sign up for and listen to at your leisure from your computer. I'd encourage you to look that up. It's parliamentofreligions.org. Parliamentofreligions.org. And it's next weekend. Someone else? Yes, John.
For a long time, Joe Cooper at Mississippi College taught from Houston Smith,
Yeah.
a world religion scholar, and I wondered if you've had a chance to meet Houston Smith and how that went.
Houston Smith is a hero of mine. I've written about Houston Smith as a hero. He was probably, and at least in my opinion, the most remarkable world religionist of the 20th century. Taught at MIT, at Syracuse University, at USC or USCLA, I forget which. Wrote a book called The Religions of Man, which later became the Illustrated World's Religions, and sold hundreds and hundreds of thousands of copies. Beautiful, beautiful written. Look at the religions. Houston Smith grew up as a missionary kid in China, and many of the things about him are fascinating, but one of the things about him that I think is fascinating is that he remained a committed Methodist all of his life, and a very, very, very serious Christian. But he also spent a full year investigating, practicing the rituals of Islam another year, Hinduism another year, Buddhism. So in his teaching of world religions, Houston Smith just did what most teachers don't have a chance to do or don't do. He was speaking at a meeting in Montreal, Canada, some years ago that we went to, and I was doing a paper as well, and he was a major speaker. And I was so excited he was going to be there. He was already probably 90, 88, 89, 90, 91. So he sat at a table on the platform, thousands of people in this audience hanging on his every word, even though he was very slow in his delivery and soft-spoken, but seated on the platform. So Janie and I chose a place very close to the front of the auditorium, and as soon as the session was over, we rushed out and went up and, to speak to him. And I think we might have been the second ones to speak to him, and he was down at a table. So I got down on my knees next to him so that our heads were at the same height. And I said to him, Dr. Smith, you are you are one of my heroes. And he said, well, I'm sure that if I knew you, you would be one of my heroes too. And this is a man who was a friend of Bertrand Russell, I can't even name all of the people that he knew that were world famous people, things that he did all over the world. So humble. And to say that to a stranger, he was a great man. He moved into a nursing home. His wife was still living, but it was time for him to have better treatment around the clock. And he was so excited because there was a Chinese handyman in the nursing home in California. And they spoke Chinese together all the time. And that just rejuvenated Houston's spirit so much, and I'm sure for the handyman as well. Thanks for asking about one of my heroes. Someone else?
I was wondering, you're in Indonesia, and she befriended other religions, but you were teaching at the seminary, so the students and those who were studying to be Christian ministers, I assume, how were they interacting with other religions? Were they becoming more exclusivist, or were they comfortable with a more pluralistic view?
Yeah, I think, first of all, the people in Indonesia lived around religious diversity from the time they were, infants. And so in their kampung or neighborhood, they might be, if they were in a Christian family, they might be the only Christian family in a almost entirely Muslim, or there might be some Chinese Buddhists or whatever in there, but the diversity was a factor of life. But the people were generally just accepting of one another, and there was, no animosity. Now we hear about from time to time churches being burned in Indonesia or conflicts erupting in the eastern islands. And a lot of that appears to be about religions, hating other religions, really was about socioeconomics. It was often very poor and out of work Javanese Muslim young men fighting against wealthy Chinese businessmen Christians. And it was about socioeconomics. It was about the lack of opportunity in life. It was about being looked down upon and treated poorly, and not so much about the religion. But it appears to the outsider that the Muslims and the Christians are fighting. So I would say that our students were coming out of a background where they had friends all of their lives were people of the dominant religion. And they didn't think of these people as their religious or philosophical enemies to be out-argued or debated or anything. These were their neighbors and friends. So it's not to say that it was always easy to get a hearing, and except that Indonesian people, I felt, were very curious about matters of religion. I have a favorite anecdote about two members of our Indonesian church in Jakarta who moved into an all-Muslim neighborhood. And Kartini, the wife, and Sutarman, the husband, wanted to become friends with their neighbors. And so Kartini would bake cakes and take them out to give to the neighbors. And when it first started, the neighbors might take the cake and throw it on the rubbish pile and refuse it, and so, be ugly. As they would go off toward church with their children on Sunday, sometimes the men would lock arms and stand across the narrow walkway through the kampung and not, try to not let them pass. But Sutarman gave this testimony in church. He said, over time, as they continued to try to be friends with their neighbors, people from these other houses would come over and visit, and they would begin to ask advice. We're having trouble with our teenager. We're experiencing a problem together as a married couple. And Sutarman and Kartini testified that over time, people began to come over and take care of them, to bring them cakes on Christian holidays, to invite them to celebrate the big moments in life in the Muslim family and so forth. So, you know, what our students knew was just, I think from growing up in that setting was, we know how to talk to these people. This is why nationals are so much better missionaries than missionaries. They already know the language, they know the culture, they know the people, they love, you know. So, yeah, I think our students were not like American students living in a majority Christian, you know, context, studying in a seminary, and everybody, you know, in every corner in town, there's a different kind of church. They were the minority community of Christian faith, but they loved their neighbors. They knew their neighbors. They, you know, had grown up in this setting. So it was a lot different than what might happen here if when you try to tell Christian seminary students the advantages of being in an interfaith. It's different. I don't know if I answered, I don't think I answered that very well, but that's some thoughts. How are we doing on time? Courtney, we doing all right?
Yeah, but I have a question.
Okay.
What advice would you give to someone who is a Christian but might be afraid of building interfaith relationships because they're concerned it might weaken their own faith as a Christian?
Very good question, and that's a you know, somewhat typical feeling because we tend to fear things we don't know about. This is why, well, first of all, we have stereotypical ideas of who people of other faiths are, and especially Muslims, because we have been taught by our national crises and also by media to fear Muslims and to think the worst of them. One of the things Houston Smith said, John, was that we should never compare the very best of our own religion with the very worst of another religion. We often will do that. So he's always talking in his books about comparing the best with the best, so that you're looking at the winnowed wisdom of the world's religions, as he called it. So the great wisdom ideas of the other faiths. And so you don't talk about how Christians love each other and how Muslims behead people. You know, that's not even close to being a comparison. If you're going to do that, then you'd have to talk about Christian people during the Crusades who butchered all of the Muslims, women, children, animals, whatever. So you just don't compare good with bad. But fear and stereotypical thinking is shaped in us, Courtney, because of the news media, because of movies that we see, because of television programs, so that we have been programmed to think a certain way about people who are different. And so it's not puzzling why somebody who really maybe would like to become friends with the neighbor down the street who's another religion, but they're hesitant, they're uncertain, they're afraid because they don't know. Now, so I think good advice for them is to you certainly begin in a social context. You know, you invite your neighbors over to backyard watermelon cutting, or you have ice cream, homemade ice cream, or you do something. And you don't begin by talking about the most difficult topic of philosophical doctrinal difference that you can come up with. You know, you don't get together the very first time to try to get to know your Muslim neighbor and start talking about the Trinity. You know, so you need to think about good ways to share. And I really believe that dialogue is not about trying to convert the other person. Dialogue is about trying to learn all that you can about the other person, to understand the other person. And I think it was Harvey Cox from Harvard who said that dialogue will never be successful if I go into dialogue already convinced that I have all the answers, that no one can teach me anything. You know, it's just my duty to inform this other person of the truth that I have. Cox said you have to go in being willing to be convinced that you're going to learn something. You could know something about God you didn't know yet. I love the illustration of the 6 blind men of Cathay who touched the elephant, having never experienced the elephant. And one touches the trunk, another touches the leg, another the side, another the ear, another the tail, and another the tusk. And they all have different ideas of what an elephant is like. It's like a spear, a wall, a tree trunk, and so forth. And it's only when you put all of those ideas together from the 6 blind men who've never seen an elephant, you begin to get an idea about something as big as an elephant. But if you take that illustration and you apply it to the mystery and the enormity of God, and you say that different people who are seeking God and trying to know and touch God touch a different part of the divine, a different part of the mystery, and they don't know the entirety of the enormity of the mystery of God. They know a part of it. They know a valid part of it, but they don't know all of it. And so when we put together by listening and asking good questions and learning and sharing and living together in a dialogue, that then we learn more about the enormity of God. There's the kind of dialogue that professionals have when they go to big meetings. There's the kind of dialogue that you can have with the neighbor down the street who's have another faith, and you begin to share after eating ice cream or what have you, what your faith is like. You ask questions. Tell us about your rituals. There's another kind of dialogue that is even more special, called the dialogue of life, in which you just share life together and you become friends. The old saying, they don't care what you know until they know that you care, is really true. The way, I think, to earn the right to share is to prove that with the love that we have for these people. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that movies, TV, other things tend to, make us fear or hate
Right.
of the groups, but it seems to me that those institutionalized groups, religions, also play into that. I think they sometimes are their own worst enemies as far as those of us who grow up in a certain religion. I think we learn sometimes from that religion that everybody else is wrong.
I think that's exactly right.
Everybody else is, needs converting, and also that comes through these institutionalized groups.
Mm-hmm.
And, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I'm going to talk after supper about the church losing its way and losing its appeal, its voice in society, and that's sort of a good entree into that whole topic. But clearly, there are some churches that are, they would be shocked and scandalized by the things I'm saying, and they don't think that there's any loving way to relate to a person of another faith except to try to convert them to become just like us. I mean, to have the idea of just sharing life together and learning about one another's faith and practices for the sake of being good neighbors with one another, with no idea that you have to convert this person for it to even be valuable. There's none of that. And so there are a lot of wonderful people who think that the best way to love a person of another faith is to change them, not to understand them, not to cooperate with them on projects in the community where you have a common concern about poverty or homelessness or hunger or whatever it might be. So, yeah, sometimes we're our own worst enemy, and we do communicate, I think, from the pulpit and classroom in a lot of churches, that people who follow other faiths, they are, well, they're heathens, they're stumbling around in the darkness, they're controlled by Satan or various things that you probably have heard in the past. And I think this certainly is not, doesn't make it easy for people in the pew. People think about, well, I want to get out there and become friends with those people. So that's a very, very good point that you made. Maybe we got time for one more, and then, yes, John?
I've got a follow-up. This is kind of a response to Courtney's question. How do you relate your Christian discipleship to your endeavors as a religious scholar? Another way to say the same thing, how do you retain a kind of Christian distinctiveness, a kind of Christian fervency without just kind of wandering into some kind of vague pluralism? Does that question make sense?
Mm-hmm. Well, it was always, we used to have, when I was at Hardin Simmons, the very first time we had an interfaith meeting there, there were two staff members, the HR director and the nurse, who wrote me pretty sharp emails asking why Logsdon Seminary was sponsoring this interfaith weekend. And then they said, oh, but then we realized, we know why you're doing it. You're doing it so that you convert these people, right? That's why you're doing it. So they didn't understand, in their mind, the only way you could be a vibrant Christian was to be a Christian of a certain type, and their thinking was an evangelistic kind of believer who is concerned about the eternal destiny of, so these, you can't have this conference and just learn about these people and welcome them to your campus. When I went on the Parliament, the Parliament had about 30 trustees, and there were about 5 Christians, and the other 25 were, all manner of different religious traditions. So I felt, it was interesting because when I was the chair of the Parliament, the executive director was an American Baptist, and we had 2 other trustees who were also Baptists, American Baptists. We had 4 Baptists out of 30, which was quite unusual. But I can say that every single one of the 4 of us were there as very dedicated, and I would say vibrant Christians, but we never thought that we were there to convert anybody. We were there to work together for causes of peace, justice, sustainability. We were there to listen to one another's life stories and, appreciate each other. So I think there is certainly a way, John, to be engaged in a pluralistic world and maintain your identity as a certain type of vibrant Christian. Maybe not the kind, and it certainly might not be the kind that your friends of other faiths were expecting, because they get their image of Christians perhaps from the news or from, Christians who say mean things publicly and get quoted and so forth. One of the nicest, I think, compliments that Janie and I had in Indonesia was from some expatriate oil company people who said, you don't seem like missionaries at all. They weren't saying that we were not people of faith. They were saying our stereotype of who missionaries were judgmental, rigid people that, that's what we thought missionaries were. You're not like that. I like you. I like you. You probably have that experience as well. So that's the kind of Christian you can be, where others are not put off by you. They're not afraid that you're going to judge them. And you're living out a life of authenticity as a Christian before them that appeals to them. So. Well, I think she's going to go get sack suppers. Let me turn it back over to Susan. Thank you for the chance to do it.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you for all of you who've come and for your questions. We are going to exit this way and that way to get sack lunches and drinks, and then be eating out on this open air area. So we'll have about 40 minutes to do that. You can come up and look at the pictures if you'd like, and then there are the rest of the pictures over in the fellowship hall. I'm not sure you'll have time, during this eating time unless you eat quickly. but afterwards perhaps, and then certainly tomorrow. And Janie's leaving the pictures, so they'll be here for a month or so at least. So you'll have opportunities during the week to go in. They're labeled, and there's a good bit of information from Janie about them. So let's have a word of prayer, and then we will be dismissed for our meal. Gracious God, we are grateful for your Spirit that is alive in the world and how you are drawing all of us to love one another and to see in our brothers and sisters your face, your image. Thank you for this time and what we've learned and the questions that have arisen in our hearts. We pray that we continue to look to you and look to our neighbors for friendship and sisterhood and brotherhood. We pray these things in Christ's name. Amen.